Okay, what if our entire understanding of cancer is wrong? I mean, for decades, we've all been told it's a genetic disease. But today, we're going to dig into a really revolutionary theory that says the true culprit isn't our DNA at all, it's actually our metabolism.
1,700. That's how many people die from cancer every single day, just in the United States. The stakes here are just immense, which is exactly why any theory that challenges the way we've been doing things, well, it demands our attention. And that brings us to the man behind this pretty provocative claim, Professor Thomas Seyfried. He's a world-renowned cancer researcher, and he's not just saying the genetic model is a little bit off. He believes it's fundamentally, completely wrong. So to really get why his theory is so radical, we first have to look at the established view, the idea that cancer is a genetic disease. In this model, the villain is basically random bad luck. Some genetic mutation just happens in a cell's nucleus, and that's what triggers this out-of-control growth. And our entire standard of care, surgery, radiation, chemo, it's all designed around this one single goal: find those genetically broken cells and destroy them. But what if we're targeting the wrong thing entirely? Seyfried's argument is that those genetic mutations, they aren't the cause. He says they're just a symptom. He proposes that cancer is, at its very core, a metabolic disease. And this comparison right here shows you just how big of a shift this really is. Instead of starting with damaged genes, the metabolic theory points the finger at damaged mitochondria, the power plants in our cells. This means the driver isn't the mutation itself, but a broken energy system. And that completely changes the solution. You stop trying to target all these complex genes, and instead you target the simple fuel that a cancer cell absolutely has to survive. So, how does this actually work? The whole idea, the whole mechanism, really rests on one concept. You figure out what a cancer cell eats, and then you start. It all starts right here, with the mitochondria. You can think of these as the incredibly powerful, super efficient engines inside every single healthy cell in your body. They use oxygen to create massive amounts of clean energy, and that's what keeps our bodies running. So Seyfried argues that this whole cascade kicks off when these little engines get damaged. Could be by anything from carcinogens to chronic stress or a bad diet. This damage creates an energy crisis in the cell. Suddenly, it can't use oxygen for fuel anymore. So to survive, it has to switch to this primitive, desperate backup plan called fermentation. And it's that messy, inefficient process that fuels the out-of-control growth we call cancer. Now, this metabolic damage creates a huge vulnerability. Think of it this way. Our healthy cells are metabolically flexible. They're happy to burn fats or ketones or glucose for fuel. But cancer cells with their broken little engines, they become extremely picky eaters. They lose all that flexibility and become desperately hooked on just two fuels: glucose, yep, that's sugar, and an amino acid called glutamine. And as Seyfried says himself, this dependency is cancer's Achilles heel. Because they are locked into this very specific menu, if you take those two foods away, they just can't adapt. They literally starve. Okay, so this brings us from the theory to the practice. If cancer has this metabolic weakness, how do you actually exploit it?
Well, this is what Seyfried calls the metabolic toolkit.
The strategy is just beautifully simple. You lower the fuel that the cancer cells need, which is glucose, while at the same time raising the alternative fuel that your healthy cells can thrive on, which is ketones. So you're starving the cancer while you feed your healthy tissue. So what causes that initial damage to our mitochondria in the first place? Seyfried points to factors that are, honestly, super common in modern life. Diets high in processed carbs and sugar, being sedentary, chronic stress, not getting enough sleep. He argues these aren't just vague risk factors. They are direct attacks on our cellular engines. So managing them is really the first line of defense. But how do you know if you're actually succeeding? Well, there's a specific biomarker for this. It's called the Glucose Ketone Index, or GKI. You can think of it like a speedometer for your metabolism. It combines your blood glucose and your ketone levels into one single number. And it gives you this real-time snapshot of what's happening inside your body. And if you look at the GKI zones here, a value over 9 means you're in a really high glucose state with basically no ketones. That's what Seyfried would call a high-risk zone. But as you get that number to drop, you move into deeper and deeper states of what's called therapeutic ketosis. So what's the magic number? Well, according to Seyfried's research, the target is 2.0 or below. He claims that this is the zone where the metabolic pressure becomes so intense that it can actively start to break down and kill those vulnerable cancer cells.
Now, all of this sounds incredibly powerful, which of course raises the big, obvious question. If this actually works, why isn't it the standard of care?
No, seriously. If you can potentially manage cancer through diet and lifestyle, why isn't this front page news? Why isn't it the very first thing they try in every single oncology clinic in the world?
Seyfried argues that the barriers are systemic. The entire medical establishment, from how research gets funded to how drugs get developed, it's all built on the genetic model. Doctors are trained in it from day one of medical school, and these really strict standard of care protocols can make it legally and professionally dangerous to even try something different.
And he illustrates just how big this disconnect is with this really stark observation. He claims that when you go talk to most oncologists about this metabolic research, the reaction is just total confusion. They look at you like a deer in the headlights because it's simply not part of their training. It's not in their toolkit.
So what's the big takeaway here? You know, whether you're convinced or you're still skeptical, the metabolic theory offers this incredibly powerful shift in perspective. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, we have far more control, more agency over this disease through our daily choices than we have ever been led to believe.
And that leaves us with this one final provocative question. Could it be that the future of cancer treatment isn't in the next billion-dollar drug, but it's been hiding in plain sight all along, right inside the fundamental way our own bodies create energy?